Jesus Christ, Joe.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. And as you can probably tell, this is not where I usually film my videos, but as I mentioned in the last video, this is my apartment where I will be staying for the academic year. It's a much smaller room, and I will try to set it up better for videos, as right now this is more of a test run, see how everything goes. Maybe I'll find a better setup, but as of right now, this is what I'm trying out, and we'll see where we go from there. Now, today, we are going to be reviewing a series that I finished a few weeks ago, and I wanted to review sooner, but of course I got busy moving. I'm talking about the Age of Madness trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. Yes, that's right. I'm talking Lord Grimdark himself. And this is a series which I've put off for a while. Oh, sorry, a trilogy I've put off for a while. And it's less I put it off, as in more that I've been trying to get through the rest of the books first. I read the original First Law trilogy some summers back, and since then I slowly made my way through the standalone books over a couple of years, and finally this most recent summer I read through it, and big shocker, guys, I loved it. Joe Abercrombie is probably one of my favorite fantasy writers going right now. He's definitely at least in the top 10, though I don't know where. That's another one of those lists, hypothetical lists, which I can talk about, but I've never actually made, so I can't tell you where on the list he stands. Maybe I'll make that video someday. But as far as that goes, Joe Abercrombie is definitely one of my favorites, and I think a lot of people agree with that because he's definitely one of the big names in the current modern fantasy circles, at least when it comes to grimdark and that subgenre. Though I'm not going to get into what grimdark is. I know that's a whole confusing genres in general are very confusing to talk about and try to figure out what specifically they are. And that's a whole other video. People are trying to discuss it. And it's very much just trying to box things into categories, and I'm not going to get too much into that. But suffice it to say, I love me some dark fantasy, regardless of what you want to call it. And Joe Abercrombie excels at it. There's a reason he christened himself Lord Grimdark on Twitter. And I mean, I think people have generally taken on that mantle for him, like carried it for him. It's like people agree he's probably the best working fantasy author who is doing grimdark. I mean, I'm not gonna speak for everyone else. I know there's a lot of other popular ones like Mark Lawrence and others I can't name off the top of my head right now. But yeah, he's definitely one of the bigger ones for sure, if not the biggest. At least working right now. But let's get to the series review. Let's talk about what I liked the most, what I liked about the Age of Madness trilogy. Now, the Age of Madness is comprised of 3 books. The trilogy, obviously, we're talking A Little Hatred, Trouble with Peace, and The Wisdom of the Crowds. And this is an interesting one because unlike the original trilogy, where I think it stalled a little bit in the first book and then really picked up with each preceding book, this is one where from the get-go, right from A Little Hatred, Joe Abercrombie is at the peak of his form. And I want to talk about that some more, but first, for now, second now, I think I want to get to the thing I think people are most interested about when they talk about Joe Abercrombie, and yes, I'm talking about the characters. Because Joe Abercrombie is a master character worker. I mean, there are other fantasy authors who could arguably do it better, but very few people can write characters that leave such the impression that Abercrombie characters do. Because even in this new trilogy, with a almost completely new cast of characters, with only a handful of maybe a dozen or so returning characters from throughout the rest of the series, he still manages to make this new cast just as memorable and iconic as the original. And that is a tough task to fill when the original trilogy is as brilliant and iconic as it is. I don't really know what else to say. I mean, I'm gonna name the characters. Now, I don't want to do too much spoilery here because there's really some big things here that I really don't want to spoil for anyone. I think this is one of those things where if you haven't read it, you can watch this video. I will avoid major plot points and such, but I'm not gonna not name characters. So I'm talking Orso, my favorite. Like Orso is he starts off as a crown prince in this trilogy. He is the son of Giselle from the original trilogy, and he is a character whose main characteristic is that he's a bit of a pathetic failure type, lazy, hedonistic in that sort of sense, as you might expect a crown prince to be in a world like that of the Circle of the World. But I think what makes him such a compelling character is how all that is very much a front to his own self-loathing and lack of motivation. Because when he is motivated, he has this drive to succeed, this iron drive, this that you just that like you makes you want to follow him. It's a sort of like as far as like people I would crown king, I or so might be the person I would want to be my king the most. And I don't know why, because the world in which he has to rule is terrible. That's what's so because I'm not going to talk too much because in this video I want to say that this is I'm assuming that you've at least read some of the first law. I'm going to make a video. I'm planning to make a video where I talk a bit more about the first law as a whole. But as for now, I'm going to focus on this trilogy, and hopefully I'm going to, and I might tread on some ideas and general concepts about the world. And this is a world in which it's very much grimy and disgusting, obviously, and you wouldn't want to live there. No, you wouldn't, because it's just everything about the the way Abercrombie writes. It's part of his like what makes his voice so unique. It's just this gritty world where you feel like you can't touch anything without getting your hands dirty. It's just everything feels wrong. Let's talk about another character, Savine Dan Glockta, daughter of our beloved cripple from the first trilogy. She is a character who, by most measures, you should hate. In fact, by most measures, you should hate all these characters. But as Joe Abercrombie does so well, you will probably understand them more than you hate them half the time. And Savine, I think, is the prime example of that. While Orso is sort of, for me, feels like the character I identify the most with in this series, as someone who struggles with a lot of self-deprecation and lack of motivation. Uh, Savine is sort of his opposite in that way. She not only has the motivation, she is constantly driven to do what she needs to do to succeed, and it's it's one of those things where you sort of admire her so much, but her ruthlessness makes you just sort of like, I can't condone that, and it's brilliant because all the while you still want her to succeed in her somewhat and just see her survive. You want to see her get out of her messes. That's just, and she's just that's the type of character she is, and she's kind and ruthless, and you just want to see where it's gonna end up by the end of the series. And by the end of the series, oh my god, guys, like I cannot talk about Wisdom of Crowds without shedding a few tears because my god, there have been very few books that have floored me quite like the Wisdom of Crowds has. I'm not gonna say what happens, but let's just say I don't. Whatever you expect, it probably isn't what happens in Wisdom of Crowd. This is one of those things where you really should try to go in as spoiler free as possible because the ending of this trilogy is devastating. Let's talk about Leo Dan Brock. Now, there's a character who you really should hate. And I think a lot of people do hate him, at least especially in the First Law fandom. And I'm probably right there with them. However, just like Abercrombie tends to do best, Leo is still manages to feel real enough to me that I understand why he is the way he is, despite being an idiot and just you want to hit him half the time. There's other one. Then the next character we talked about is Rika. I like it was one of those. It was Ricky, I think. It's spelled in a different. Her name is spelled in a very interesting way. She's the daughter of the Dog Man from the original from the series, and she's got her long eye, she calls it, and that's just future sight. And of course, she's one which I think of the main cast, she's the one I was least interested in, at least in the first book. But then, as things went on, I definitely grew to appreciate her more, especially in the second book. There's some stuff when, like, in the second book when she's dealing with her long eye that it's just really well written and it's just really well executed. It's really cool, I think. And yeah, she's another one of just Abercrombie's solid characters. Like, you need somebody in the North. She's basically the representative of that in this series, and she goes through quite a lot. Let's just say that she's got quite the journey. And oh man, I once again, this is another thing where I can't talk about the ending of the series because it's gonna spoil some of the major events that take place. And even I guess I'm gonna say the next two characters. I'm mostly focusing on the POV characters in this section. I guess there's Vic and Gunnar. They're sort of like the minor, non-noble characters, but even they are like still fascinating to read because they sort of act as our sort of everyman in the Abercrombie sense. Because like they're definitely not regular people, but they're also commoners by the general margin, I guess you could say. And it's sort of in their story as far as it relates to each other and it relates to the rest of the cast is very fulfilling to watch play out. I guess the next thing I'm going to talk about is the style. I think when it comes to the way Abercrombie writes, it's very much distinctive to how the personality of its world. We call him Lord Grimdark, I think, because the books he has written, as far as I can tell, very much all embody this tone, and that's just because it's this tone of writing which he thrives at doing, and all of that sort of comes together to create this world which you wouldn't want to live in, but you love to read about because it's just so dirty and cutthroat and filled with amazing characters that you love and hate at the same time. And there's a lot of authors that can write detestable characters. I guess George R. R. Martin is sort of like the premier one, the one who has written some of the most some of the greatest characters in fantasy. And I'm not really going to say anything about it because that's just a fact. But yeah, Joe Abercrombie definitely has sort of found a way to write shorter books than George R. R. Martin in a lot less time than it has taken him to write his books. And you're going to get the same level of satisfaction, I think, from reading the first Law books and the Age of Madness trilogy as you would from reading what's available of the Song of Ice and Fire. I'm going to talk about the story here for a second, and this is just a little general thing. This is set like several decades after, not several, a couple decades after the original trilogy, and it very much feels like it because so much has changed as far as the world is concerned. It's very much heading into the industrial age, and so there's very much some revolutionary undertones, and it's all very much like you and there's a lot of interest as far as thematics go. I think this is very much a more clear cut story than the original First Law trilogy was. And I think you can there's definitely a lot more to be written about as far as consistency in its thematic depth in this trilogy than there is. I guess if you want to ask me whether or not this trilogy is superior to the original, I don't actually think I can answer that because it's sort of going to depend on you. Personally, it's one of those things that's going to take a little time, but I think they're pretty much neck and neck. And with more time, I think this trilogy could potentially surpass the original. I know, call me crazy, but it's just one of those things where if you consider everything that he does in this series and how much a better writer he is than when he wrote those original books, it just feels like overall, as a trilogy, it's more concise and well executed. So, on a pure note, yeah, I think this is probably one of the situations in which I'd call this series better. I don't know. I'm just rambling here like I usually do. And another thing I'd say is the twists, guys. If you want some twists, like the original trilogy is a handful of twists, especially towards the end. This one does too, and they will floor you. That's basically what I'm saying. Like the last book, as like I remember, I was not sure what was going to happen. I was on the edge of my seat reading a lot the Wisdom of the Crowds, and the whole time, even as I just saw the book kept getting like shorter and shorter as I was getting near the end. I was like, what's going to happen? There's still so much to be resolved, and he does it, and he leaves it open ended in such a way that he might return to this world, which I partially hope he does and doesn't, because I sort of don't know where he can go from here. I mean, I'm saying there is I know he can go further from here, obviously, and I know he's discussed on the possibility of returning to the writing the First Law, but I don't know what that's going to look like. It's gonna be what it's gonna be, I guess. But yeah, it's good stuff, guys. It's good. It's great. It's great. Now on to the maybe you won't like so much. This is very much a very subjective thing. I literally couldn't think of anything wrong with this trilogy. So the one thing I will advise to you, viewer, is you may not like it at the first because it is a new cast of characters. Now there are a lot of mainstayers from the original trilogy that show up. Some of them die, some of them don't. I'm not gonna tell you who. This is Abercrombie. That's not a spoiler. People die. That's what the series. Yeah, whatever. Leave me alone. Yeah, you might miss the original cast, but trust me when I say that the new cast will grow on you just as much as the original did. And that should not deter you from reading this. Now, should you read this trilogy, guys? Yes, you should read all the Abercrombie books. I haven't read the Shattered Sea or whatever that other trilogy of books in another world he wrote. I've heard mixed things, but regardless, you should read the First Law books, all of them, the standalones, even Sharpen's short story collection. It's all worth it, guys. It's great. And yeah, I think I'm going to wrap up this review now because, in conclusion, The Age of Madness is potentially the best sequel trilogy I have ever read. And I've read a lot of sequel series, right? Red Rising is still coming out, so when that's done, maybe that can be a contender for best sequel series. But like Mistborn Era 2 is okay, and it ends pretty well, but it does not even come close to touching the first era. I think most people would agree, though I know some people would disagree. I'm not. You're allowed to like what you like. But yeah, this is like whether or not this is the better series is up to you to decide. But as far as being a worthy successor to the original series, it absolutely succeeds in what it's trying to do, and it's arguably just it's perfection to a certain extent. I'm not saying it's a perfect series. I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect series out there. I love The Wheel of Time. It's probably my favorite series of all time. I don't but even that series has a lot of problems. Like there's no story, or is art cannot be perfect. It's one of those things I've thought about before. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video, guys. What do you think of the Age of Madness trilogy? Let me know down below, and like and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. And I hope to see you next time, guys. Bye.